Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Myths, Mysteries, Facts, Truths of the First Fleet. This afternoon, we're going to be looking at some of the myths and the truths in regards and the actual facts in regards to HMS Sirius of March 1790. And why HMS Sirius? Back in 2013, we decided to actually work on HMS Sirius in regards to its 1790 voyage, and this was all part of the 225th anniversary of the shipwreck on Norfolk Island. HMS Sirius, her final voyage, is over 280 pages of 2 years of my life in regards to the ship, the voyage, and the people. It was launched on Norfolk Island in 2015. And when it comes to some of the myths and what people say about HMS Sirius, believe you me, I have heard them all. I've been told that the convicts weren't at Port Jackson settlement, they were all at Rose Hill. And the HMS Sirius, along with the supply, actually travelled up the Parramatta River. And all the convicts got on there. And then they went over to Norfolk Island. No, that didn't happen. It left from Port Jackson, from Sydney Cove at Port Jackson. And the convicts, they were all at Sydney Cove. There were, however, 20 convicts out at Rose Hill. Even after the HMS Sirius left, Clark reported how empty the town or the settlement actually looked. If they were over at Rose Hill, you wouldn't be saying that. Many people think their ancestors, be it convicts, Marines or crew, actually volunteered to go to Norfolk Island. Like, pick me, sir, pick me, sir. That didn't happen. Sydney Cove, Port Jackson, they were starving to death. They were running short of provisions, stores, food. There were no crops. Rose Hill had only just started and had not really produced enough crops to feed the people. All the reports coming back from Norfolk Island were glowing. We're growing maize. We've got all this produce happening and all this gardening, and it's really nice over here. So Philip decided to literally split the colony in two. With HMS Sirius and the supply going to Norfolk Island in March 1790, it meant that over 50% of the First Fleet were on Norfolk Island. When they did decide who was going to go to Norfolk Island, they did keep married convict couples together. But the men, women and children who went to Norfolk Island were not listed as family groups or as couples on the shipping muster. Both men and women and children are all listed separately. Did you know they nearly never made it to Norfolk Island? HMS Sirius was nearly wrecked on the South Headlands at the Rocks. Of course, Captain Hunter never reported this. You can see here we have women convicts, and this is an example of the muster. But Robert Nagel, a seaman on HMS Sirius, has a journal, and he actually reported the near shipwreck of the Sirius at South Head. I've heard that the Sirius, I read that the Sirius was wrecked on Lord Howe Island. I just won't go there with that one. I've also been told that or the convicts were stranded on Norfolk Island. No, they weren't stranded on Norfolk Island. The convicts and the Marines who went to Norfolk Island they were going there anyway, shipwreck or no shipwreck. They had already disembarked at Cascade on the 14th and 15th of March, shipwreck or no shipwreck. So at no stage really were they ever stranded on Norfolk Island. Yes, Norfolk Island went on to rations and the movement of food was restricted, etc. That's because Norfolk Island didn't know that over 200 people were going to end up on Norfolk Island, but not because of the shipwreck. They were already going there. When they did arrive and disembark at Cascade, they then had to walk over to Sydney town in the late afternoon, and many of them arrived at Sydney town in the dark. They were coming from a settlement of starvation, so they weren't exactly the most fittest people in the world, and they had that long trip to make in the dark, through thick forest of pine trees, along a walking track. Something that took them nearly 6 hours to do. And of course they were carrying what supplies they had, or nursing children. You can see here from the HMS Sirius muster, it does say, for example, James Grace disembarked on the 14th of March. Thomas Howard, 14th of March. James Shear, 14th of March. These are all convicts. Even the Marines from the garrison who were part of the group going to Norfolk Island all have the 14th or the 15th of March. We got Francis Davis, the 15th of March. There's no logistic order in the list of names. They may look alphabetical, but they're not. These two screenshots look alphabetical, but they were not alphabetical overall. So here we can definitely see that Anne Beasley, a woman convict, Elizabeth Bird, woman convict, Jane Creek, woman convict on the 14th, and Francis Davis on the 15th. There was no shipwreck at this time. Here we have Jane Fitzgerald, Tasman Allen, Catherine Smith, Mary Spencer, James Langley, 15th of March. When they did decide to keep the married couples together, they were the convicts. Many of the women were actually de facto or lovers of some of the Marines, and they were actually carrying love children at the time. Anne Beasley actually being one of those convict women who had been with a Marine and was carrying a love child on HMS Sirius, March 1790. The Sirius came around to the bay at Sydney Town, and not Sydney Town, New South Wales, Sydney Town, Norfolk Island. There was only one convict aboard the ship at this time, and he was still on the ship because they were going to use his services to unload all the provisions off the ship. The ship had sailed basically too close to the reef, and you can see the reef here in regards to the reef. You can see the waves breaking over across that reef. But the landing flag was flying high, so Hunter thought, oh, well, this is okay. It's safe to come in and land all the provisions. The waves breaking over the reef should have been a sign to Hunter that it was not safe to take the ship that close to shore. At his court-martial in April 1792, Captain Hunter actually blamed the topsails of the ship for the accident, because he said he tried to move away when he realised he was really close to the reef, but they failed, so it wasn't his fault. The shipwreck thus was not his fault. For those of you who have been to Norfolk Island, it is quite obvious that there is a reef stretching along the length of the bay at Sydney town. Only one longboat had been disembarked with stock from the HMS Sirius when a wave came along, picked up the ship and dumped her on a reef. It's a coral reef, and it ripped out the bottom of the hull of the boat, or the ship, sorry, not the boat. The decision was, first of all, to get to cut down the mast of the ship to lighten the weight of the ship, so hopefully to keep it afloat, and to get the precious cargo ashore. The precious cargo being the two marine wives who were still on the ship. One of them was pregnant, and of course Captain Cook's timepiece. So when anyone says that their ancestor, be it a convict or a marine, was stranded on Norfolk Island, they're wrong. The convicts were already going there. The Marines were already going there, regardless of the shipwreck. There's the Supply and the Sirius coming into Sydney Bay and the unloading of the ship. When they started to think, okay, we've got to get these provisions off the ship after the wreck, they threw the animals over the side, and they swam to shore. They then also threw all the luggage chests over the side, and it floated out to sea and did not wash up on the shores of Sydney Bay until about 4 days later. They actually put allocated Marines to keep an eye on the beach to stop any of the convicts stealing any clothing or stock or provisions that might have been washed up from the shipwreck. Captain Hunter got off the ship that afternoon. The remaining crew were left aboard until the following day. So on March 20, all Sirius crew were marked on the shipping muster as of that date. This is how they got the crew off the ship. And it's a pulley system, and you can see they've got provisions and chests floating in the water because they realised, they already knew that Norfolk Island was short of supplies. Port Jackson was too. So they were actually actively trying to save not only the people, but also the stock and the provisions. And of course, the rum. So they were dunked. It's a tea bag dunk across the coral reef. John Shortland came ashore on the second day, on the 20th, and his back and his legs, his entire body was literally down to the bone. The coral reef had literally ripped off all his skin. And then that night they all slept on the wet sails. So he had rheumatism for the rest of his life. And you can see this is another illustration of the pulley system of trying to get the people off the ship. At the time of the wreck, there were women convicts on the beach watching the provisions being unloaded from the Supply and the Sirius, and they screamed. Ross then sent the Marines down to the beach and said, take the women back to their huts. The Supply did come over and say to them, do you need help? Hunter replied, no, she's lost. She being the ship. Go away, make sure you keep the Supply safe. This is an example of the HMS Sirius muster for the crew. And you can see they've been mustered on the island on the 20th of March on Norfolk Island. But hold on. What's this 12th of April 1790? Not all HMS Sirius crew were actually on the ship at the time. The existing 1790 crew members who were, yes, still assigned to the ship, but many actually remained back at Port Jackson. Their duty was actually to attend the South Head lookout. Not all crew actually stayed on Norfolk Island after the shipwreck. 9 men, or 9 crewmen, were transferred to the crew of HM Supply. 23 of them returned to Port Jackson as passengers, leaving Norfolk Island on the 24th of March. And when the Supply came back into Port Jackson, the crew who were maintaining the South Head lookout knew something had gone wrong, because the Supply was not classified as a ship. It was too small. It was a small yacht. It was a tender. And they realised something had happened, disaster, because they could see their fellow crewmates standing on the deck of the Supply. The stranded crew, or the crew who were stranded on Norfolk Island, actually did return to Port Jackson in February 1791, along with other crew members of the HMS Sirius who were already on Norfolk Island. For example, the Webb brothers. Now back to Norfolk Island. The Sirius was not burnt down to the water by William Dring. This slide here in front of you at the moment is an account of slop, clothing and bedding. So account of the clothing, slops being clothing, jackets, shirts, frocks, trousers, drawers, shoes. And it accounts for what was actually lost from at the time of the shipwreck. So 200 trousers, 299 drawers, 100 waistcoats, 500 stockings, etc. So the loss of clothing and provisions has all been accounted for. This, as I said before, the Sirius was not burnt down to the water by William Dring, who was a convict. He did volunteer to go out and get more of the provisions off the ship, and there was 2 of them. They sent them out, but they found the rum, so they had a bit to drink. And then it got night time, it got cold, so they set up a bonfire on the ship, but the ship did not burn down. The fire was put out. A convict went out to the ship and got the 2 of them off the ship. HMS Sirius actually stayed afloat until January 1792, when she eventually broke up. 8 seamen who were stranded, or 8 seamen from the stranded crew, after they returned to Sydney, they were given permission to return to Norfolk Island as settlers and also return to their loved ones by Governor Phillip. And they were the first free men to be actually given land grants on Norfolk Island. There is the website hmssirius.com.au. It's not complete yet, but it's there. And on the website, you'll find new research findings on some of both the convicts, male and female, that we've been revisiting all our research from HMS Sirius, her final voyage. On the website, you'll also find out information on the 230th HMS Sirius shipwreck anniversary on Norfolk Island. So the myths, the mysteries, the facts and the truths of the First Fleet when it comes to HMS Sirius was not all the crew were stranded on the island. None of the convicts were stranded. They were going there anyway. They did not volunteer to go to Norfolk Island. They were just chosen to go to Norfolk Island. And the result of the ship and the Sirius and the Supply going to Norfolk Island in March 1790 resulted in half of the First Fleet, because the Second Fleet had not yet arrived and the Guardian had been in a shipwreck, that over half the First Fleet was now based on Norfolk Island. History may have been changed if the Guardian wasn't shipwrecked, because it was bringing a few convicts and it was mostly bringing supplies to the settlement of Port Jackson at Sydney Cove. So history may have been totally changed. The convicts were not stranded, and I think that's the whole point of this podcast, because I've seen it so many times. My convict, was on the HMS Sirius when it went down, and they swam ashore. No one swam ashore. Jacob Nagel, the seaman, he did swim back out to the ship at one stage about 5 days later, and also swam back into shore. But no, there were no drownings of HMS Sirius. They did a marvellous job to get everyone off safely. Yes, they did lose stock. The crew were stranded. Captain Hunter, in that time that he was stranded on Norfolk Island, he acquired a dislike, and a hatred attitude towards Norfolk Island. It shows in his writing, it shows in his attitude when he became Governor of New South Wales, and he spoke so negative about Norfolk Island. He was so disappointed when the surprise arrived in August 1790 and said, "Yes, you're going to take us back to Port Jackson." No, that was not the case. It was not until February 1791 that the Supply came on that exact mission to collect all the Sirius crew members. So when you see someone who says to you, no, my convict swam out to the Sirius to save Captain Hunter's books and to save the logs and all of this, it just did not occur. But as we say, maybe never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But there was only one convict aboard HMS Sirius at the time of the wreck. There were some Marines and their wives. There were, of course, the ship Marines and also the crew. Even Major Ross had already disembarked at Cascade and was now actually the commandant of Norfolk Island. And King was going to return to Sydney anyway on the Supply. So that part of history did not change. However, the wreck itself left the settlement of Norfolk Island and New South Wales with only one ship for defence, and the Supply was not a capable ship for defending if there had been an attack on Port Jackson. So not Sydney, we know it as Sydney today. Back then it was actually Albion. Albion had to wait for the arrival of the Second Fleet in June and July, August, etc., 1790. We're going to continue with these podcasts on myths, mysteries, facts and truths of the First Fleet. I haven't decided what we're going to do next week, but something will come up. We may actually look at maybe some of the children, where we've actually found some additional research in regards to both Molly Gillen, myself and many others have always put no further records found. Only this week did we find yet again further records on one of those convict children of the First Fleet, who was a convict, but he was 14 at the time, and he was considered a male adult convict on the shipping muster. of HMS Sirius. Good afternoon, everyone. Take care.